Now, I will have an argument with anybody on earth that Powell was not a racist. Anyone who could have made the speech that he made about the treatment of detainees at Heffer camp in Kenya in 1959 in the House of Commons, where he condemned the then colonial office for allowing severe mistreatment of Kenyan and Myanmar prisoners, was not a man who could have a racist bone in his body. But of course, what the Conservative Party these days is concerned with is not about facts, it's concerned with how things appear, and facts must not be allowed to get in the way of appearances. And of course, a party that now judges itself, it seems to me, entirely on artifice and entirely on superficiality, is not a party that is going to want to have an intellectual debate about anything like that. And so when candidates get up and refer to things that have happened in the past, they have to be very careful that Dave Cameron's own political view on this subject will chime with theirs, and in many cases it won't. Well, we've seen particular sensitivity about the race question. Now, I feel this is, it's important to be sensitive about racial issues. It's, I think, simply ill-mannered to be racially prejudiced, and the Conservative Party should have no part of it. But when you sack a man like Patrick Mercer from the front bench, not for being racially prejudiced himself, because we all know jolly well that he isn't, but because he was referring to the racial prejudice of NCOs that he had served with in the army, that is absolutely absurd. When you sack a man like Bernard Jenkins from the vice chairmanship of the party, not because he is a racist, I've known Bernard since we were at university together, and again, he hasn't got a racist bone in his body, but he warned an Asian woman candidate in a seat in Essex that he knew very well that she might encounter racism there. He was removed from the vice chairmanship of the party even for saying it. I did write actually at the time when Bernard was sacked that if any Conservative MP admitted that as a child their nannies had collected the tokens from Robertson's jam for them for a collection of gollywog badges, they too would be sacked. I wrote this in the paper, and I was told a couple of weeks later by a Tory MP who read it that indeed he had such a collection when he was a child and he wouldn't dare tell anybody about it because he was convinced that that would be the end of his career in politics. Now, I thought he was joking, but he was absolutely serious. And there is this climate now, and it's a climate that we saw, I think, very vividly in the 1990s when Mandelson took over and Alistair Campbell took over the thought management and thought policing of Labour, that the Tories have learned from the Labour Party. They are under the impression that they will only get elected if everybody says the same thing at all times, and if anybody says anything that is remotely controversial, or that might make people point the finger of accusation at someone for being right-wing, whatever that means, that they will be out. I think Cameron's main problem here is the BBC. I felt, and I'm sure many of you will understand what I'm saying, that in the last 3 years, Dave has sought to create a Conservative Party that the BBC can find acceptable. It's been one of his dreams, I think, to go on the Today programme and not to be accused of being right-wing by people like Jim Notty. Now, again, I really couldn't care less what the BBC thinks about the Conservative Party, because the BBC, as far as I'm concerned, is a root and branch, prejudiced, anti-conservative organisation. But there is an obsession on the part of the Conservative Party with getting a good press from the BBC, and I feel this is what drives it. And I really can't understand this. About 2 years ago, I was asked to go on a pre-recorded interview on The World This Weekend, and I was on with Darcus Howe, who is a black man who writes for the New Statesman and has a very controversial point of view, quite opposite to mine. And I can't remember who she was, but it was an Asian baroness from the Liberal Party. And the baroness was introduced as Baroness, whoever she was, Liberal Democrats. Darcus Howe was introduced as the New Statesman columnist Darcus Howe, and I was introduced as the right-wing controversialist Simon Heffer. I stopped the interview there, and I said, this is an absolute bloody outrage. I am the associate editor of a great national newspaper. You can feel free to say that if you want to. But equally, I don't understand why you didn't introduce Darcus, whose columns are every bit as controversial as mine, as a left-wing agitator. And the interviewer stuttered and said, no, perhaps you're right. And I said, well, I am right, and I don't really feel I have much confidence in proceeding with this interview, which was about race relations. If you're going to approach it in such an incipiently biased tone as you have. But you see, rather than confront that sort of prejudice in the BBC, the current Conservative Party has chosen to try and appease it, and to make itself and its candidates and its members of Parliament and anyone who speaks for it or could be construed as speaking for it as so anodyne and so devoid of any views of their own and certainly any prejudices of their own, that they will not give any trouble to the rest of the media, who might want to report any little indiscretions that they might have uttered. I don't really know where we go from here, because I can't see any mood in the Conservative Party, in the people who run the Conservative Party, to make it broader and to make it more outgoing. We all can think of various people on the right in the party who are hugely gifted. I will name two names, John Whittingdale and John Redwood, who are not in the shadow government and who jolly well should be. They're not there because they are viewed as people who have a take on politics that could be troublesome to the social democrat consensus that David Cameron wants to bring in. But if the Conservative Party becomes a centre-left party, and I fear if it is elected to government in the next 18 months, we will be in for a rerun of the Heath years. It will be that sort of colour of the Conservative Party. Then many people in this country are going to feel monumentally disenfranchised, because they will end up having a choice between three essentially left-wing parties. Indeed, when I heard Mr Nick Clegg last week, in the space of about 10 minutes, commit himself both to greater opposition to the European project, to sending his children to private schools, and to tax cuts, I thought that perhaps he might have been making a bid to be the leader of a proper Conservative Party. All that we can do as Conservatives who disagree with this really savage limitation that's put on Conservative activists and Conservative MPs and candidates is to complain about it. And organisations like the Freedom Association are absolutely brilliant for that. And the fact that we have this Freedom Zone here, Roger, during this conference, shows that there is still a home to go to for respectable, free-thinking people who don't have a view that is dictated by Dave Cameron necessarily, and who might want to take issue with him not just on sensitive questions like immigration, but also on what I thought were quite straight down the line questions like tax cuts and spending cuts and other things that the Conservative Party is afraid to talk about. I was hoping that somebody would get up in the Conservative Party by now. George Osborne certainly didn't do it today, and say that because of the almighty mess that the Labour government have made of this country's economy, any Conservative government that came in would be committed to massive public spending cuts, which might well and probably would include the sacking of hundreds of thousands of members of Gordon Brown's client state. Now, that is to my mind so self-evidently necessary that it doesn't really require any debate. But we've heard nothing of this in the Conservative Party, and I'm sure that if anyone got up who was a Conservative MP of a reasonably senior nature and were to say that today, they would be in serious trouble. Now, what this comes down to in the end, and this is true, I think, of all the examples that I've given you of the way in which the party tries to control thought and police thought at the moment, is that it is a reluctance to confront the British electorate with reality. Now, the thing is, the British electorate are confronting reality every day. They know how bad things are in the economy. They know the difficulties that the so-called multicultural experiment has caused in this country. They know how bad our schools are. Anyone who gets up and talks about we need to have grammar schools is howled down and treated as a leper. We can't have this. It's not just making it easy for David Cameron, as he would see it, to manage possibly bolshy Conservative MPs and candidates. It's also betraying the British people in not confronting the issues that are of real concern to them in their everyday lives. And I'm afraid that unless the Conservative Party stops this terrible narrow-mindedness and allows a freedom of debate in the party, it will be seen as more and more remote. And it may well get elected on that basis in 18 months' time, but it will certainly not have proved its fit to govern. And that really should be the concern of everybody. In that way, groups like the Freedom Association, in continually confronting people with reality of what politicians should be doing and what the problems are that they have to face, is doing a magnificent job, and I commend it. I'm very grateful to have been asked here today, Roger. I'm delighted to take questions from anybody for the next 20 minutes or so. And I want to thank you all very much indeed for coming to hear me today.